Because there has been so much Star Trek created by so many different people over so many, many years, there is a multitudinous variety of ways in which to enjoy it. I'm not talking literally, like you can watch it on your TV, you can watch it on your phone, you can watch it on your computer, you can pop in a DVD or a Blu-ray, you can stream it on Paramount Plus. Well, except in one case. I'm speaking more in terms of the many different ways in that Star Trek offers fans, different aspects of it that people can connect with and find interesting, that will draw them back again and again. For a lot of you, it's the lore, the accumulated history of this imaginary world and how it all fits together. For others, it's the cultures of various alien civilizations we've seen, or the optimistic depiction of the future of Earth, or the ships. For me, it's all about the stories. And stories usually are all about characters. And when it comes to Star Trek, there is no one character who epitomizes the franchise more than this guy. These guys, who are all the same guy. Except for the one in the middle. He's an alternate universe variant of the guy who these other guys are. Still counts, though. Why Spock is actually the most important character in Star Trek. Spock is the half-Vulcan, half-human science officer and second-in-command of the Starship Enterprise, as seen in the original Star Trek series, and why am I telling you who Spock is? Does anyone watching this not know already? Does anyone watching this seriously not know who Spock is? You all grok me, right? The almost universal recognition of Spock inside and outside the dedicated fan base and his importance to Star Trek as a whole go hand in hand. Spock is not the lead character in Star Trek. That's Captain Kirk. Spock is the second lead. But Spock's place in the show and in the hearts and minds of the people who love the show and everything else that has grown out of it goes far beyond his placement in the cast. The second lead is a major role in any show, but Spock is something much more significant. He's the breakout character. Even though he's only the second most prominently featured character in the ensemble, and even though he's not the main protagonist of most episodes, though he is the main protagonist of some episodes, a few of which are classics, Spock is the main reason lots of people watched and still watch the show. Spock is who people talked about, and still talk about, after the end of the episode. Which is not to say no one watched the show for Captain Kirk, or Uhura, or Sulu, or McCoy, or any of the other characters. They all had their fans. They were and are all somebody's favorite. But Spock was and is the favorite of the most people. And you don't have to watch all that much Star Trek to understand why. First and foremost, Spock in Star Trek The Original Series is brought to life by a smart and talented actor who knows exactly who the character is and what to do with him. Leonard Nimoy takes a character who in less capable hands could have easily become a gimmicky joke and imbues him with intelligence, humor, dignity, sex appeal, and a hint of sadness. For his performance as Spock, Nimoy was nominated for an Emmy in the Best Supporting Actor in a Drama Series category for all 3 seasons of Star Trek. As of this recording, no other actor has been nominated for an Emmy for a Star Trek show. One of the most, forgive me, fascinating things about watching Nimoy play Spock is seeing his performance evolve right before our eyes. In the original pilot episode, The Cage, Spock is emphatic, energetic, excitable, almost like a puppy in comparison to how he is later on. In the early episodes of Star Trek's first season, Spock smiles more, seems comfortable expressing his emotions, albeit in an understated way. But by midway through season 1, Nimoy's more or less got it dialed in, and Spock is as we today would expect him to be. What a pleasure it is, though, to be able to watch that process happen on screen. From the 2 pilots through the first few episodes of the series, we can see Nimoy finding the character, discovering more and more about Spock the more he plays him, until finally arriving at a portrayal that would make Spock one of the most iconic characters in all of popular fiction. Leonard Nimoy is the most important actor on Star Trek, which is a big reason why Spock is the show's most important character. Nimoy found that character, brought him to life, and in doing so, set the tone for the series and ultimately the entire franchise. Spock's popularity is part of that, a considerable part of it, but his importance goes beyond that. Spock symbolizes Star Trek. He contains the essential elements that make Star Trek, the original series and the spin-offs, so compelling. At the heart of Star Trek are irresistible contradictions. The silly versus the dramatic, the cerebral versus the passionate. We find these contradictions in Spock himself. He is represented on screen by an actor wearing pointed prosthetic ears and sharply jutting eyebrows, yet he comes across as a living, breathing person who we can and do take seriously. He is presented to us as the product of a civilization that suppresses emotion in favor of logic. He's usually cold, calm, and analytical, but we are also shown that beneath that tranquil surface is a turbulent sea of emotions. Spock embodies the values that form the foundation of Star Trek. He is perhaps the ultimate representative of the diversity and inclusion that defines not only Starfleet and the Federation, but the stories that we are told about it. The utopian future Star Trek presents is built on the idea that humanity has finally transcended racial, cultural, and national barriers, embraced diversity as a strength, and learned to live in peace. What better symbol of that unified, enlightened humanity could there be than Spock, an alien who has found his place as a valued member of a multiracial, multicultural crew? Beyond his popularity and his thematic and symbolic significance, Spock has also been a major influence on how the casts of the Star Trek spin-off series have been structured. Spock represents not one, but two character types that have reappeared in almost every Star Trek show to follow the original series. First, Spock is the outsider who is adopted into the group and comes to represent the best of that group. He is the only non-human on the crew of the Enterprise during the original series. He is the alien, the anomaly. He sometimes finds it difficult to live and work alongside his emotional and irrational crewmates, but he is also selfless, principled, loyal, curious, willing to protect the lives of others even at the potential cost of his own. He is everything a Starfleet officer or a hero should be. Kirk expresses this in his eulogy for Spock at the end of Star Trek II, when he says, "Of all the souls I have encountered in my travels, his was the most human." Literalists sometimes complain that Kirk shouldn't have said this because Spock would have been insulted, but as usual, they miss the forest for the trees. The point Kirk and the movie itself are making is, Spock was the best of us. This character type is found in the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation in the person of Worf, the Klingon, a member of a race that is now an ally to the Federation, but is historically one of its most fearsome enemies. And just as Spock is also kept at arm's length by his fellow Vulcans who are wary of his human heritage, Worf is seen as inauthentic by other Klingons because he was raised by human parents. But like Spock on Kirk's Enterprise, Worf becomes an indispensable member of the team aboard Captain Picard's Enterprise. Born of one world, raised in another, belonging to neither, yet able to synthesize the best and noblest elements of both. There are many other examples of this type of character in Star Trek. Deep Space Nine has Odo, Voyager has the Doctor, and later Seven of Nine. Enterprise has Phlox and T'Pol. Discovery has Saru. Prodigy has, well, pretty much the entire cast. They're all outsiders from Starfleet's perspective. It's part of the premise. And Strange New Worlds has Spock. The second recurring character type introduced into Star Trek by Spock is the smart one. Spock is the Enterprise's science officer, the go-to guy for a quick and precise assessment of the situation, the one to ask for a theory when some Star Trek shit is happening and no one has any idea what is going on. What's the deal with that gigantic space amoeba? What are we supposed to do about the fried egg-looking parasites that are flying around killing everybody? Ask Spock. Other examples of the smart one in Star Trek: Data on TNG, Dax on DS9, the Doctor and Seven on Voyager, T'Pol on Enterprise, Stamets on Discovery, Zero and eventually Rok-Tahk on Prodigy, and Spock on Strange New Worlds. Spock's influence on the casts of Star Trek shows that followed the original series reaches beyond character types to how those characters relate to one another. Spock's close friendship with Captain Kirk establishes a pattern that is repeated again and again throughout the franchise. In almost every Star Trek show that came after the original, the captain of the ship and their first officer formed the core of the ensemble. They aren't always depicted as the best of friends, but they are the two most important characters on the show. Picard and Riker on TNG, Sisko and Kira on DS9, Janeway and Chakotay on Voyager, Archer and T'Pol on Enterprise. Though they aren't very chummy at first, their relationship evolves into a close and trusting friendship. Discovery doesn't fit the pattern at first, since its lead, Michael Burnham, doesn't become captain of the ship until the end of its third season, but in season 4, Burnham is captain of Discovery, and Saru serves as her first officer, and I'd call Burnham and Saru the core of that ensemble. On Prodigy, Dal is the captain of the Protostar, but there isn't really a first officer, nor is any one relationship between two characters clearly the core of the ensemble. Dal and Gwyn's relationship is important, but Gwyn isn't explicitly second in command, and Dal's relationship with the Janeway hologram is also prominently featured in the show. So the pattern doesn't fit there either. Strange New Worlds is also a bit of an outlier. Captain Pike and his first officer, Number 1, are very close, but I'm not sure if Number 1 is the second most important character on the show. I think the second most important character on Strange New Worlds is probably Spock, who is also close to Pike, but not yet the Enterprise's first officer. Lower Decks and Star Trek Picard don't really fit the mold either, so the pattern established by Spock and Kirk in the original series holds for most, but not all of its spin-offs. Nevertheless, the influence on the franchise as a whole is obvious. We also see echoes in subsequent Trek shows of Spock's relationship with Dr. McCoy. On classic Trek, Spock has a friendly relationship with Kirk and an antagonistic relationship with McCoy. TNG attempts to recreate that dynamic in its second season with Data, who has a close friendship with Geordi and an initially antagonistic relationship with Dr. Pulaski. Deep Space Nine has Odo, who is close with Kira and antagonistic with Quark. Voyager has Tuvok, who is close with Captain Janeway and antagonistic toward Neelix, though the antagonism only runs one way there, since Neelix likes Tuvok. Enterprise has Archer, who is best friends with Trip, but, as I mentioned earlier, has a tense relationship with T'Pol early on, so it's not as prominent or as frequently recurring as the other tropes I mentioned, but it definitely comes up. Everything I've discussed up to now has been from a vantage point outside of the story world of Star Trek, the perspective of the viewer, the critic, the witty yet insightful, charismatic, endlessly watchable, aesthetically pleasing, and exceedingly modest video essayist. But this is not the only point of view from which Spock can be described as the franchise's most important character. At this point, after almost 60 years of TV shows and movies, I think it's safe to say that Spock is also, canonically, the most important individual in the Star Trek universe. Let's run down the list of historically significant events in which Spock plays a pivotal role. This won't be comprehensive, but I'll try to hit the big ones. Spock helps Kirk prevent a war between the Federation and the Klingons in the TOS episode Errand of Mercy. Spock helps Kirk prevent Starfleet from being erased from history in The City on the Edge of Forever. Would Kirk have been able to allow his beloved Edith Keeler to die for the good of the future if Spock had not been there reminding him firmly and repeatedly that it had to happen? Spock destroys the giant space amoeba that has the power to kill off the populations of entire star systems in the Immunity Syndrome. In Star Trek The Motion Picture, Spock plays a crucial role in the resolution of the V'ger crisis, mind-melding with V'ger's consciousness and gaining the insight that it has learned all that it is capable of learning and now must evolve, which leads to Commander Decker choosing to merge with it in order to reach a higher plane of existence. In Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Spock sacrifices himself to allow the Enterprise to escape the explosion of the Genesis device, saving the lives of his crewmates. After coming back to life in Star Trek III, Spock is essential to saving Earth from the mysterious probe that attacks the planet in Star Trek IV. It's Spock who determines that the probe is communicating in whale song, and it's Spock whose time warp calculations allow the heroes to travel to the past to obtain humpback whales and then return. In Star Trek VI, Spock opens diplomatic talks with the Klingons, beginning the process of winding down the long-standing military conflict between the Klingon Empire and the Federation. He also leads the effort to clear Kirk and McCoy of the assassination of Chancellor Gorkon and exposes the conspiracy between Starfleet officers and Klingons to sabotage the peace process and plunge the Federation and the Klingons back into war. In the Star Trek The Next Generation two-parter, Unification, Spock is revealed to be one of the leaders of a movement to reunite the Vulcans and the Romulans, who went their separate ways centuries before. Along with Captain Picard and Data, he foils Sila's plan to launch a secret Romulan invasion of Vulcan, which would probably have provoked a war between the Romulans and the Federation. So, how many wars has Spock helped to prevent by this point? 3 that we know of? That's pretty impressive. Though, perhaps not as impressive as when Spock creates an entire alternate universe. Okay, 2 points I need to acknowledge just in the interest of not kissing Spock's ass too much. 1, Spock creates the alternate universe, which is the setting of the 3 most recent Star Trek films, 2009's Star Trek, 2013's Star Trek Into Darkness, and 2016's Star Trek Beyond, by accident. It's not like he got up one morning and said, hey, I know what, I'm going to travel to the past and cause a new timeline to branch off from the old one, just for shits and gigs. And 2, that alternate universe resulted because Spock failed to prevent the destruction of the Romulan homeworld by a massive supernova. I guess nobody has a perfect record, except Rocky Marciano, and Floyd Mayweather, and Layla Ali, and Sam Cooke. Specifically, Nothing Can Change This Love. Tell me something wrong with that song. I dare you. There's nothing. Nothing. Spock doesn't succeed in preventing the Romulan supernova, but he gives it his best shot. With his ship, informally known as the Jellyfish, he uses red matter, whatever that is, to create a black hole to vacuum up the supernova, but he and the Narada, Nero's ship, get pulled into the black hole and spat out in the past, where they, especially Nero since he arrives first, change history and create the alternate timeline. Once he's there, though, Spock does his best to help out. Nero captures him, blames him for the destruction of Romulus, strands him on Delta Vega, where he is forced to witness the destruction of Vulcan at Nero's hands. Then Spock encounters James Kirk on Delta Vega, where Montgomery Scott also just happens to be, and gives Scotty the equations that enable transwarp beaming so that Kirk and Scotty can transport themselves back aboard the Enterprise and help defeat Nero. Once Nero's ship has been destroyed and things are returning to relative normal, Spock, usually referred to as Spock Prime when he appears in these films to distinguish him from his variant who is native to this timeline, founds a new Vulcan colony to help his people rebuild after the destruction of their homeworld by Nero. Later on, during the events of Star Trek Into Darkness, he gives his variant some advice on how to defeat Khan. See, now that's a team player. Speaking of the variant Spock, the one native to the alternate universe, or the Kelvin timeline as it's officially called, he's a pretty big deal in his corner of the multiverse too. This Spock, played excellently by Zachary Quinto, steals the Jellyfish back from Nero and uses it to destroy the Narada's drilling rig, thus preventing Earth from being consumed by a red matter black hole. Then, as seen in Star Trek Into Darkness, he saves a pre-industrial civilization from extinction, violating the spirit, if not the letter, of the Prime Directive in the process, then goes on to help defeat evil Admiral Marcus and Khan, bringing Khan in alive so that his magic blood can be used to revive Kirk, who died from radiation poisoning while repairing the Enterprise's engines, in a reversal of Spock Prime's death in Star Trek II, a narrative development that was hated by lots of fans who complained about how unoriginal it was. Many of the same fans who, 10 years later, were jizzing in their pants over Season 3 of Star Trek Picard. Can you explain that to me? Can you? Not that we should expect our opinions to be perfectly consistent. We're not robots or Vulcans. I'm just asking. Then, as seen in Star Trek Beyond, Kelvin Spock locates the camp where most of the Enterprise's captured crew is being held prisoner by Krall. Once they're liberated, Spock assists his crewmates in stopping Krall from using a weapon of mass destruction to kill millions of people inside the massive Starfleet outpost Starbase Yorktown. Not a bad day's work there. But as significant a role as Spock is shown to play in the events of the various TV episodes and films I have thus far described, I think it still might have been a stretch to call Spock the canonically most important person in the Star Trek universe up until we were introduced to the younger version of Spock, played by Ethan Peck in the second season of Star Trek Discovery and currently on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Before he even appeared on the show, Spock was part of the backstory of Star Trek Discovery, since that show's lead protagonist, Michael Burnham, who eventually becomes the captain of the Starship Discovery, is established as Spock's adopted sister. After her biological parents were killed by Klingons, or so young Michael thought, it later turned out her mother had survived and escaped using a time travel suit. Isn't Star Trek neat? Michael was raised by Sarek and Amanda. If I can jump back out of the story world for a moment, I'd like to note that the creative choice to give Michael a connection to Spock speaks to the significance the creators of Discovery attached to Spock. Are you worried that your new Star Trek series might not be accepted by the fan base? What better way to ease the audience into your new thing than by associating it with one of their beloved old things? I'm not saying it's the boldest creative decision possible, but it's a tried and true trope for a spin-off series, and I think it worked out for the best in this case. And who did the creators of Discovery select out of all the countless established Star Trek characters to relate their new protagonist to? You think anybody pitched making her Scotty's sister? I doubt it. All due respect. Anyway, back to in-universe mode. Michael and Spock became estranged eventually, but they managed to patch things up when Spock becomes involved in the investigation into the mysterious red bursts that have been detected appearing throughout the galaxy. Spock and Captain Pike, who is in temporary command of Discovery, along with Michael and the rest of the Discovery crew, help to defeat the evil AI known as Control, which has the potential to wipe out all sentient life in the entire galaxy. So, add helped to save all sentient life in the galaxy from extinction to Spock's resume, please. Thank you. What really seals the deal on the whole Spock is the most important argument, though, is the end of the first season of Strange New Worlds. It's an episode titled A Quality of Mercy. This is not a Spock episode. This is a Captain Pike episode. Pike's character arc throughout the first season is closely tied to his foreknowledge of his fate. Thanks to touching a time crystal in Season 2 of Discovery, Pike knows that someday, in approximately 7 or 8 years, he will be grievously injured, disfigured, and forced to rely on a beep chair for mobility and communication. Pike is told when he takes the time crystal that his fate is sealed. He cannot escape it. But in Strange New Worlds Season 1, after talking over the situation with Number 1, Pike starts to wonder, what if I can't escape it, though? Since he's a character in a Star Trek show, this determination to change his destiny leads to an encounter between Pike as we know him and his future self. Not his future self who is in the beep chair, but his future self who did change his destiny, avoided the accident that would have disabled him, and is now a Starfleet admiral rocking a sweet New Trek-style monster maroon uniform. So the best of all possible futures, right? Actually, no. This future version of Pike has traveled back to warn his past self not to change his fate. And to illustrate why it's such a bad idea, future Pike jumps current Pike ahead to a point in his future after he has avoided the accident. He is still captain of the Enterprise, and some really important shit is about to go down. Shit that will be familiar to many Trekkies because it was famously depicted in the Star Trek Original Series episode Balance of Terror, one of the most celebrated shows in the history of the franchise. From that point on, most of A Quality of Mercy is an alternate timeline version of Balance of Terror with Pike in command of the Enterprise instead of Kirk. The Enterprise still chases after a cloaked Romulan ship, and things still end with the commander of the Romulan ship facing his own imminent death and telling the captain of the Enterprise, "In a different reality, I could have called you friend." But in this version, the Romulan Empire ends up declaring war on the Federation, and the Enterprise is seriously damaged by a Romulan fleet before it can warp away to relative safety. After the battle, Captain Pike goes to sickbay and finds Spock seriously injured, severely burned, missing a leg, brain damage, injuries similar to those Pike was fated to suffer. Deeply upset by this, Pike returns to his quarters where his future self reappears and tells him that the war which just began between the Romulans and the Federation is still ongoing in his own time period. Millions of people are dead. That's the cost of Pike escaping the beep chair. He has to trade his life for those millions, including Spock. And when it comes to the unfolding of history, Spock's is the most important of all. Future Pike tells his other self, "Every time I change my path, Spock dies." And that's a problem because Spock has things to do. Fate of the galaxy type things. Now, that's about as close as you can get to a canonical declaration that Spock is the most important person in this world without having some godlike being come in and just literally say that, preferably straight to camera, so there's no misunderstanding. If Pike avoids his beep chair fate, Spock dies. And if Spock dies, everything else goes to hell. Pike travels back in time to tell his past self, yeah, our fate sucks, but Spock is more important. Protect Spock. Whether you approach it from an in-universe perspective or the perspective of a viewer, critic, analyst, whatever the hell I am, there is ample evidence from the text to conclude that of all the characters in Star Trek, throughout its many various iterations, Spock is the most important. Within the fiction, he's the single most consequential person of his lifetime, finding himself at the center of major events and making a significant contribution to those events more often than anyone else we see. From our perspective in the real world, he's the most popular, the most recognizable, the one most commonly and immediately identified with the franchise. His mere presence is one of the defining characteristics of the franchise. What is this, Star Trek? I don't know. Oh, wait, there's Spock. It's definitely Star Trek. He's the walking, talking symbol of Star Trek and everything it stands for, everything that makes it unique, everything that makes it Star Trek. And really, he has been from the beginning. We might question the wisdom of the producers of latter-day Star Trek projects making Spock such a central figure. I know I sometimes question it, despite how much I enjoy most of those projects. But there's a reason why the people who make Star Trek, of every generation, of every creative regime, don't want to let Spock go. It's the same reason we don't want to let Spock go. What really matters isn't the reason why Spock is the most important character in Star Trek, but the reason why Spock is so important to us. And there's not just one reason. Some of us look to Spock for a reminder that reason and compassion are not mutually exclusive, and that logic is inadequate unless complemented by humanity. As Spock himself says to Valeris in Star Trek VI, logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end. Some of us see in Spock the hope that one day we'll be able to overcome our prejudice and bigotry, live and work together in peace, and realize that inclusion and diversity make us stronger. Some of us identify personally with Spock. He shows us that no matter where you come from, or where your parents came from, or how different you are from the people around you, you still have value. And you can find others that you will value, and who will value you. Be it for any of those reasons, all of those reasons, or other reasons I didn't mention, Spock is so important to Star Trek because he's important to so many of us. Hell, to most of us. Who doesn't love Spock? No, come on. I don't buy that. Bones loves Spock. We've seen it. I don't accept that one. See, that's what I'm talking about. Everybody loves Spock. Okay, I'll give you that one. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is going to be, but before I do that, I want to give shoutouts to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Bill, thanks Bill, Dustin Floto, thanks Dustin, A Centaur, thanks A Centaur, Cyruso, thanks Cyruso, S Bear, thanks S Bear, John Leparati, thanks John. Jason E. Geis, thanks Jason. Clayton Ford, thanks Clayton. Roderick Ayers, thanks Roderick. Charlie Pauch, thanks Charlie. Bastian, thanks Bastian. David Woodard, thanks David. Next, new channel members. They are Eric Byer, thanks Eric. Reggie Zimmerman, thanks Reggie. Jethro Gullner, thanks Jethro. F. Hart Fetzko, thanks F. Hart. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon, or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button right below the video, or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. Now, to next month's regulation Trek Actually topic, and where this month's topic was a consideration of a single character who has been featured and reinterpreted in multiple projects through the decades of Star Trek's existence, next month's topic invites us to consider not a character, but a role. A role in the dramatic sense and in the literal sense of a position on the crew of the ship or space station that is the focus of the show. It's an important role that has been filled in different ways by different characters, all of whom we will discuss in next month's video. Who is actually Star Trek's finest first officer? Can't wait for that one. That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then, so until the next time you see me, whenever that is, thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.